Thank you for joining us today. This is a special supplementary webinar as part of the CAFO update meetings held throughout Wisconsin in January and February. My name is Erica Bjurstrom. I'm the Regional Dairy Educator for Brown, Door, and Kewaunee counties, and I will be your moderator today. We hope to provide this opportunity as an informational discussion on today's topic, highly pathogenic avian influenza, or HPAI. Today, we will cover two aspects of HPAI and provide an overview of the science from the animal context and discuss what that might mean for worker health. This is a webinar format. Please add any questions or comments in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. This webinar is being recorded, and we will provide you with a link to the recording within 2 weeks, and we hope you will be using it as a reference guide for your farm. Before we get started with our first speaker, I'd like to inform you about two HPAI resources from UW-Madison Extension. The first is the HPA resources website. Go to go.wisc.edu/HPAI-resources to see a collection of up-to-date status of HPAI in Wisconsin and in the U.S. There are additional transportation, testing, and educational resources for your farm and herd. Please also note that there is a special edition of Bovi Noticias newsletter available this month. This special issue focuses on HPAI and includes information on the current status of avian influenza in Wisconsin, symptoms to watch for in cows, which animals may be at risk, recommended care for affected cows, and what dairy employees need to know to help protect their workers. It also outlines what steps to take if a case is suspected within the herd. This issue, along with previous editions, are available at go.wisc.edu/Bovi Noticias. Our first presenter today is Dr. Keith Poulsen. Dr. Poulsen earned his DVM and PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2004 and 2012. He specializes in large animal internal medicine and is a diplomate of the American College of Veterinary Internal Medicine. He holds an appointment in the medical sciences at the School of Veterinary Medicine and is the Doctor of Wisconsin Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory, or the WVDL, the director of the Wisconsin Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory, the WVDL, at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. The WVDL, a National Animal Health Laboratory Network Level 1 laboratory, focuses on infectious diseases, diagnostics, and diagnostic testing of cattle and bovine germplasm for international export and trade. He has been involved in diagnostics, management, public education, and national strategy discussions in the ongoing H5N1 influenza A outbreak in poultry and dairy cattle since 2022. Dr. Poulsen is actively engaged in service-related projects across the United States, South America, Asia, and Africa, focusing on infectious and zoonotic diseases and export market development for Wisconsin and U.S. dairy products, cattle, and bovine genetics. And with that, please let's welcome Dr. Poulsen.
Hello, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. I think we have about 20 minutes, and so I'm going to go through some of this information pretty quickly, but the purpose is to really have a discussion and time for a discussion at the end. And I know many of you that are in different counties around the state. I've been doing quite a bit of outreach with your herd veterinarian. I'm going to really point that, really talk to your herd veterinarian, or I'm happy to continue to give this talk, or maybe with some more time, so people can ask more questions. And I saw many of my colleagues in Department of Animal Health at DACCAP are here too. So more than happy to jump on a webinar, or maybe get in our van and tour the state. But with that, really, we kind of have two different sides to what we're going to talk about today. Is what have we learned from H5N1, and how do we apply that to Wisconsin dairy? Because Wisconsin is certainly unique, and from what we've seen. So I have three important slides, but I'm going to go through them pretty quickly because we're limited on time. And then I have three biosecurity recommendations based off of some work that we've done with National Milk Producers Federation. and the American Association of Bovine Practitioners. So with that, here's slide number one and how important or what we've learned. And what we know is why did this strain of flu spread starting in 2023 with a single spillover event? We know that it was a single spillover event, or at least we're pretty strongly confident based on the metadata and the sequence of the virus. Why did it move? This is an old map, and I did this on purpose. Why did it move to really 8 different states out of the Texas Panhandle and get a laser pointer here. Why did it move to these 8 states? Well, about 10%, 9 to 10% of our dairy production are really based off of movement of lactating cows. And these cows they calve, and the calves are raised in the hot, dry climates, and then they move north for their lactation. It's very effective and efficient, and they're moving anywhere from 30 to 70,000 head of lactating cows per week. So why did Wisconsin not see a B313 outbreak? Because Wisconsin moves about 6,000 head back and forth to this area every month. But we don't move lactating cows. So really with our B313 strains, our biggest risk factor for moving flu is movement of affected lactating cows across state lines. Now, this can be a little bit different now when we talk about our D1 strain, which our colleagues at Department of Animal Health were just getting done with all of the issues that we saw there. We didn't see any sick cows. We did not see any sick people. I think I may have accidentally skipped my first slide. But we didn't see sick cows. We didn't see sick people. That's point number one. Point number two, surveillance is working. Wisconsin has the most robust and effective surveillance program in the country. And this is a disease of cattle. This is not a food safety issue, especially with our D1.1 strains. We're not seeing sick cows or sick people, and pasteurization is 100% effective. Okay, here's the second most important slide for a little bit of background. This is how infection moves in a herd. We only have one herd with this type of data. This is really hard to get because you essentially need to be testing or collecting samples all the time and waiting for something to happen. That's exactly what happened with this graph. So this is a single 2,500 cow dairy in Idaho in the spring of 2024. It was actually happened before we knew exactly what this was. At that time, it was called the undiagnosed morbidity and mortality event. So what happened was this farm was seeing their neighbors with sick cows. They weren't dying, but they were sick, and they had to treat a lot of sick cows. And they decided to start taking milk samples. And right here, this black line is important because that's when their herd started seeing sick cows. They called up their friend Drew Magstad at Iowa State and said, "Hey, these are important. Do you think these are important? Do you want them?" He said, "Yes." Got in his car, drove up, and got them overnight. They're that important, and this is the only data set that we have like this. So what happens, the important part is that this red line is PCR. This is positive, this is negative. They're kind of inversely related. Key points here is that we know that cows are shedding 14 to 16 days before they show clinical signs. The herd in Wisconsin never did show clinical signs. We actually caught them on surveillance probably somewhere around here. Now, the other thing is that this farm cleared virus at about 21 days after clinical signs. So 21 days after clinical signs plus 2 weeks for shedding before clinical signs, and probably another week, 7 to 10 days of incubation before they start shedding. So about 5 weeks after they're exposed, they started showing a positive immune response, and that's what this is, with antibody in the bulk tank milk. So virus or pieces of virus, that's a PCR test, versus an antibody, which is your body's response to an infection, which is this purple line. The other key point here is that after this purple line, it's really difficult to find live virus, because the antibodies are binding it, most likely. Now, for B313, we do have evidence from one farm in Texas. It was actually a human isolate that they were shedding with antibody. We haven't seen this with D1.1 strains. And there is one publication that shows that. The hard part about it is that this data is really hard to get in a controlled setting. So we know we have 2 weeks to prepare. That's why surveillance is really important for this B strain. And then we know that the national average for the B strain, B as in boy, of shedding is about 65 days. D strains are different, and we don't have a lot of data to really show how long these bulk tanks are actually shedding infectious virus and or detectable via PCR. Okay. Obviously, I could talk about that one graph for probably the entire hour, but I'm running out of time here. So here's the third most important thing, and then we're going to move into biosecurity. Then we'll move into the human health side. So we know that with influenza in animals, we don't have vaccines, and we know that with poor biosecurity shows and has a more significant or severe impact. We also know that biosecurity is not a magic bullet. So biosecurity is hard to do. It's expensive, it's time consuming, and it's boring. But it actually does have a significant impact, specifically with this virus, amongst any other infectious diseases on the farm. And dairy is well behind swine and poultry production because we've never really needed it in cows. Cows are like walking tanks. They can handle a lot, but poultry and swine, they're very susceptible, and we need high biosecurity to protect their health. But this graph alone is epidemiological traceback, meaning all the connected lines and dots here are what we call close epidemiological links, meaning they could be a shared veterinarian or could be a nutrition salesman or a feed salesperson or a hoof trimmer, or in the poultry side, it could be an electrician, right? I mean, we all use shared vendors. Here, this is a link of Colorado has about 100 dairies. 90 of them are in 2 counties because that's where the water is. And the green dots are farms. These are all dairies except for these 2 dots here are poultry farms. And these poultry farms are shower in, shower out facilities, high biosecurity. The red dots are vendors or service providers, and you can see how tightly and closely linked these are. So this makes biosecurity quite a challenge, right? There's lots of people on and off your farm every day, and that's, like any typical farm, biosecurity is a challenge. What we can say is that farms with better biosecurity, it took longer for them to become infected. They shed and were under quarantine for less time. And the disease in their cows in general was they did not treat as many sick cows and they didn't see as much of a milk drop. Now, what about this biosecurity? Because we were harping on biosecurity for a really long time about this is the key. It's the only really tool that we have, and we might have some unintended positive side effects with things like BVD or Salmonella or IBR. But we still saw spread throughout the country into 17 other states. We still didn't recognize all of the infections because there's a lot of uncertainty and fear associated with the new disease in dairy. And so a lot of people are wondering, well, why do we do biosecurity if it doesn't help? It does help. And it does help for more than just influenza. And that's where this came through. Everything I'm going to talk about with our 3 biosecurity recommendations are really from the National Milk Producers website. They did a great job distilling it down. We worked on this in the summer of 2024. And it takes the secure milk plan, it distills it down to 7 different things you can do. Very similar information that's on DACAP's website, on UW Extension's website, and USDA. I think this is the easiest, most digestible way to get this information. And even from those 7, there are 3 things that I think that we can do right now. Okay. The first one is we can isolate new arrivals coming onto the farm. I find that's probably very difficult to do. Not very many people have barns or dry lots that don't have any animals in them, right? That's hard to have that excess capacity, especially if we're expanding or maybe we're overcrowded as it is. But one thing we can do, and the USDA will pay for this testing, is that any lactating animal you bring on the farm that's not from one of your properties, I would test it. I would test it and do surveillance, and think about that, talking to your veterinarian and maybe calling the Department of Animal Health or your friendly diagnostic laboratory. That's us. And we can help you work through that. And that's exactly what DATCAP did before shows. And it was very, very effective. Before shows, exhibitions, and sales, they required testing of all lactating animals within 7 days of show. And what what that really ended up doing is it made things like World Dairy Expo or State Fair or county fairs were not super spreader events. Didn't see any infection because of that testing. So that's what I would do for a farm as well. I would do it for other viruses and bacteria too, but we could talk about that at a later date. Number two, we want to protect the farm. We want to make a line of separation and treat everything on the farm as a clean zone and everything outside dirty. Okay, so in order to do that, that's pretty hard to do because very few farms in Wisconsin are built from scratch. They're usually the home farm, and there's a 500 cow addition, or maybe on the home farm, that's where we calve out. That's where our transition cows are, and they come, or maybe we're raising our heifers there, and then we go to our uncle's farm and our aunt's place, and then we put it all together as we continue to grow over time. But keeping that line of separation and knowing who's on and off your farm, that's it's critical. And the farm that we saw that was affected in Wisconsin had very tight biosecurity, which was great for getting through this and not spreading it anywhere else, because we're pretty sure that came from a migratory wild bird, whether contaminated feed or water. We probably are never going to know that for sure, but it was the same isolate or very, very genetically similar to one in a poultry outbreak that was earlier in the fall. Here's certainly something that we can do, but no one wants to, is require clean or individual farm dedicated footwear, very, very key, and clothing. So what I tell veterinarians is that we always wash our boots when we leave the farm, but when you get to the next farm, I would make a optical show of spraying your boots off, and making sure that you are really showing and setting an example that biosecurity is important and cleanliness is important. Think about the people that are coming to do maintenance on the parlor, changing the inflations, changing the hoses, tweaking the vacuum, dropping off feed. Does the Amazon person really need to drop off in the parlor milk house office? No, they don't. Think about where that Amazon driver has been. I think the Amazon driver drops off at our house a couple times a day because we live out in the country. And I don't have time to go to Target, right? So we know that dirty clothes will spread this virus. This story here is about someone who was working and was a maintenance person, technician on a dairy. Always came home, took his dirty clothes off, and the cats would always go smell it. Well, the cats died. Same thing happened in Michigan. What have we learned? We've learned a lot, but we still have a long way to go, right? We know that this is not a food safety issue because pasteurization is 100% effective. Some of the first studies were actually done at UW in a PCR machine of all things, because we had such little amounts of milk, working with Center for Dairy Research and the Influenza Research Institute. We know that the highest risk for B313 strain movement is interstate movement of lactating cows. Good thing Wisconsin does not do that. We don't have that dairy business model. D1.1 is still migratory birds, and we don't know exactly what those risk factors are for when the birds are flying overhead. I saw my first robin yesterday. I can't believe it. Pretty soon I'm going to hear cranes in the marsh across the street. We know that not non-lactating animals are low risk, low but not zero. We don't really know exactly what their risk is, but it's negligible compared to lactating cows that are affected. We know that biosecurity is helpful, but it's not a complete silver bullet. And we know that we can use the bulk tank milk sample for herd level surveillance, which is critical not only for influenza, but for other infectious diseases that are shed in milk, like foot and mouth disease. Emergency response is hard. Every time we do this, it's different. And I think many of our colleagues from the Department of Animal Health, they'll tell you the same thing. Every time it's a little bit different. There's different environmental factors, the pathogen changes, the industry changes, and then there's also politics and economics in there as well. What do we need to know? Why do we care? I think I'm going to end with this. We don't know exactly how this moves cow to cow or farm to farm. We have some ideas, but it's really hard to replicate. I'll just leave that there. We do know that endemically infected farms, which there are long-term infections spanning a year or more in California and Idaho, they need help. They need new biosecurity. They need the ability to use and develop new vaccine technologies. And if anyone here on this call is from the turkey industry or the layers, they would be telling you the same thing. We need to be able to do something different. We need to at least be able to have the conversation about how to use new vaccine technologies or to be able to use a vaccine, period, and how can that affect our trade policy as well as animal and public health. Why do we care for people, right? We're all in this for people development through food. Well, why we care is the amount of virus in the environment. Right now, there are pretty big barriers, and we always talk about a pandemic potential. But typically, no one does anything about pandemic potentials until the pandemic is really in your neighborhood. Normal human behavior, right? You can only worry about what's in front of you, or people tend to do that. Well, thinking about that, if that were a virus, and this works really well in the holiday season, we're just getting beyond that. This is the best analogy that I can figure out is that if we're thinking about the current strain that's in and has been in the Wisconsin, Mississippi flyway and in every major Wisconsin waterway during migration, is if that virus strain, D1.1 are red M&Ms, and then you say you have someone, if my kids, I have kids in grade school, half their classes were sick in the last few weeks with influenza, amongst other things. Those are different strains of influenza. Those are H1s, H3s. Sometimes there's H7s and H9s in there. Well, if they are put in together, whether it's a person, a bird, or specifically swine, pigs are like little influenza blenders, then they mix and they genetically reassort. And that's when we can see major changes and viral strains that create significant public health issues. Okay, so that's why we care. It's hard to get that message across. So really, I think about this as animal agriculture, as food security and national security. So I think with that, I'm a couple of minutes over. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. More than happy to take questions in the discussion later. But with that, I'm going to switch to Dr. McCoy. Thank you.
I think for now we can switch over to Dr. McCoy and we'll do questions just as for both of you at the end. I don't see any questions in our Q&A at the moment. So our next speaker is Dr. Kate McCoy, PhD. Dr. McCoy directs the Occupational Health and Safety Surveillance Program at the Wisconsin Department of Health Services. She currently serves as the co-chair of the Occupational Health Subcommittee of her National Professional Association, the Council of State and Territorial Epidemiologists, CSTE. Her team of epidemiologists and health educators work on a variety of topics related to worker health. She is part of Wisconsin's HPAI response operations and helped lead both statewide media campaign and directed dairy worker outreach efforts to raise HPAI awareness among dairy producers and workers. In 2025, she won CSTE's Presidential Priorities Award for a pilot project on dairy worker behavior health. Let's please welcome Dr. McCoy.
Great. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah, I love that we have this combination because, Keith, I think this is going to work well. I'm going to come on more of sort of the pragmatic human side of things, but Dr. Poulsen already kind of gave you a lot of the background of why this is so important. So I am, as we said, from the health department on the occupational health side. I work on this topic supporting our infectious disease folks. And I also come to this with a lot of background in working with immigrant workers across different areas, and I've had the pleasure of working with dairy producers and workers over the past year or so. Still have a lot to learn about dairy, but it's fascinating. So what I want to do is start from some of the great resources that the UW Extension folks have put together. At the top of the hour, they were talking about the Boy Noticias, which is just out, which is the special on HPAI, and some of the resources that are in there. And so some of those are from our resources. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to be walking you through a bunch of resources and strategies. And there are a lot of different things, but really they all sort of come back to this landing page that we have from our occupational health side on farm worker health and safety, and a few key documents. And links are in the chat. So a few key documents that will walk you through a lot of this information on the human health side from a very kind of practical standpoint. We have two different versions of like a 4-pager guide that is Wisconsin specific. And one version is what employers should know about HPAI, and then what workers should know about HPAI. And I just put the red or rust colored version is what the workers one looks like. And I put that title there in English and Spanish, just so you can see, for example, that we have those in different languages. And those appear at the bottom of our webpage. So again, a lot of the information I'll be walking through is in those guides. So Keith talked a little bit about leading into the human health issues and the One Health kind of approach. Why are we concerned from an animal and human health perspective? So this is the CDC's National Situation Summary page for HPAI. This is the human situation. So we have had 71 confirmed human cases in the US and 2 deaths. And I think the important thing to note is right now, as Keith was saying, there's not an emergency right now, but there's concern that those M&Ms are going to mix, and we don't want those M&Ms to mix, right? So it's a very good time because this isn't a pandemic, and hopefully will never become one, where the general current public health risk is low, due in large part to the fact that the person-to-person spread of this virus is very limited. It's a good time to take stock of what you can do to protect the folks who are working on your farm, yourself, your community, and of course, your animals in your operation. So those select number of human cases are most likely the tip of the iceberg. We have evidence and a lot of reason to suspect that there are many other cases that just have not been detected or reported. And Keith mentioned the fact, people are concerned for a lot of different reasons, especially earlier on, about coming forward and reporting cases. But just to note the breakdown of those human cases to date, that dairy workers and folks involved with dairies are the preponderance of those cases. And HPAI is tricky. So what are the signs and symptoms? Well, it can look a lot like flu, which can look a lot like a lot of things. And so here we have some of the common symptoms. Conjunctivitis has been a telltale sign in a lot of the dairy cases, dairy worker cases that have been detected. Fever, body aches, fatigue, shortness of breath, headaches, etc. This isn't actually exhaustive. People can also have more stomach flu type symptoms as well. But these are some of the more common symptoms. So it's tricky because, like I said, a lot of things can manifest the same way. And because of that, that's why things like surveillance, like milk testing, are so helpful and so important. Other clues that we can use to figure out, is there evidence of virus in the area? So we're not in an emergency situation right now from a human health standpoint. There's reason to be concerned, but I understand people have a lot of things to be concerned about, and business owners have a lot of things to worry about. So why take the time to think about protecting from HPAI and protecting yourself and your workers in particular? Keith already alluded to the fact that a lot of these best practices translate to other types of situations as well. So the best practices that you'll be implementing for HPAI, those biosecurity practices that he was mentioning and some additional ones that I'll talk about for more personal protection are general best practices for good infection prevention and control. So if this all blows over and nothing comes from HPAI beyond what's happened to date, you're still left with some much improved biosecurity and worker protections. And again, when you're taking these steps, you're protecting your workers, your animals, your community, and your reputation. And I say that because this is a disease that can range from nothing, asymptomatic, to very severe. We saw those 2 deaths. People can die of this. There was the young person in Canada who was in intensive care for a long time. People can be very severely impacted. You already know about your animals. Community is that consideration about spread beyond the farm, and especially the reassortment that Dr. Poulsen was talking about, that concern about pandemic potential. And reputation, you don't want to be the place that was ground zero for a terrible public health outbreak. So all of those are reasons to invest in these practices right now. How can it spread on dairy farm, and particularly how might people be infected? That science and research is ongoing, but generally I like this CDC graphic for the visuals that it provides and highlighting. There are a lot of potential different ways, splashes, aerosols, contaminated surfaces, that people could get infectious material into their eyes, nose, and mouth, for instance. And you can see too that a lot of this is in the milk parlor, right around those lactating cows, which, as Keith mentioned, is really high risk environment. So protecting eyes, nose, mouth, and washing off contaminated surfaces, we'll talk about that in a minute, are really important things. This, by the way, is also available in Spanish. This is a CDC handout. So we recently had launched a media campaign to try to highlight just a few things that workers could do and that employers can promote. And hopefully some of you saw some of that media campaign, heard some of the radio ads, saw some of the social media, but it's these 3 steps: gear up, wash up, step up. Gear up meaning what you need to know about personal protective equipment. And the long and short of it is we're not recommending that everybody have full PPE all of the time under all situations. It's a risk-based approach. So having some general PPE use, which a lot of dairies already have in terms of things perhaps like gloves, coveralls, boots, things like that. And then scaling that up when you have reason to believe that you're around infected animals. Wash up, basic hand washing, we'll go over that in a bit. And then step up actually was Keith's 3rd point as well. So we're reinforcing the same message about keeping boots clean and on the farm, boots and like he mentioned as well, clothing, because as he was saying, that can be taken home and that can then spread to off farm to people, pets, others who can be affected. So I'll quickly go through 2 of those. You won't need the gear up, the step up. Gear up PPE, and this is from that fact sheet that I showed you at the beginning. We walk through, what are some of the types of PPE that are recommended. Eyes, nose, mouth, if you think of that, goggles are helpful. A lot of people prefer face shields, which aren't as protective, but work better, I understand, for some folks in moist environments, and there's better adherence sometimes for those things. So here's some of the PPE again. If you're in a really high risk situation, having some kind of respirator is helpful. We know that that's also a challenge, but it's really important for folks to know what are the options available and under what situations would you want to use them. And people also need then training to use PPE. So as we were saying before, a lot of PPE is going to be new to a lot of dairy, but there are some wonderful videos out there in English and Spanish. This one that is the UW produced video is in that Bowie Noticias, so it's right there. And then Michigan State has another one as well. Both of these are available in English and Spanish, and they're just two of a variety of different videos out there that are particular to dairy. Wash up in terms of hygiene, washing hands well and often, avoiding eating, drinking, vaping, or touching face with dirty hands, touching your phone with dirty hands, touching your mouth. This is so simple, but if every farm could really implement this well, it would make a huge difference. So thinking about getting to full good hygiene practices is going to require hand washing stations or bathrooms, etc., and time to use them, and people be encouraged to take the time it takes to use them. Same with separate eating and drinking areas and time to use them. People have to be able to step away from the milking parlor, step away from wherever they are, go wash their hands, be in a clean environment, have their water bottle in that clean environment, etc., to really keep that line of separation. And we have, again, there's materials even on how do you wash your hands well. So in English and Spanish, and that video series that we highlighted in the previous slide is not HPAI specific. It's more general for antibiotic resistance, but it applies to a lot of, like I said, a lot of different things. That they have the video 5 on personal protective equipment, but video 6 is on hand washing. And those are also available in English and Spanish. And then step up, this is again, the boots, the laundering. What you're seeing in front of you is from our webpage, the Farm Worker Safety and Health, Occupational Health page, and reinforcing those messages of using separate shoes, work gloves, and clothing, working with animals and animal products, keeping those things on the farm, not wearing dirty boots into your car, into your home, off farm, etc., not taking dirty clothing into the house where kids are going to hug you, pets are going to run up against you, etc. One thing we didn't include in this media campaign, but I think is really important, is you want to also encourage your employees to speak up, because communication is key in these situations. You want them to be able to ask things and say things like, is this how to do it? Am I doing it right? Am I putting this on right? Am I cleaning this right? Am I practicing biosecurity correctly? You want them to tell you, these gloves don't fit. I'm not going to use this. It's not working. You need to take that back and do something better. Is it really okay to take a water break? We're out of disinfectant. The cows seem tired. I'm not feeling well, right? All of these are key pieces of information that if people don't tell you, you're not going to know, and you're not going to be able to interpret that information or make decisions and take the actions that need to be taken to keep your farm as safe and healthy as you can. So things that you can do to improve uptake, give the why. You know, we're doing this to protect you and your family and the cows and the business and your job, right? It's all of the above. And yeah, a lot of times this is a pretty mild illness in humans, but it can be really serious. And we certainly don't want anybody to be in that situation where they get really, really sick. Train, post signage, and retrain in language and media that people can actually interact with. We know there's a huge knowledge gap between what a producer might know on this topic and what all of their frontline workers might know. So it's really important to make sure that the information is getting out. If you have regular meetings, you know, farm labor meetings, weekly meetings, monthly meetings, however, it's a great opportunity to embed this information into a training. Model and praise the desired behaviors. You know, if you want people to do it, you've got to do it yourself if you're on site. And especially grant permission and adjust workflows. So you might know that if you're sharing information with people about, you know, using PPE and washing their hands, etc., that by extension, you also mean that they should take the time to go to the break room, etc. But people who are risk averse, you know, and don't want to lose their jobs, right? Don't want to be bad employees. You know, a lot of us end up in these situations where we really want to please the people we're working for. People are going to perhaps assume that they don't have permission for something unless it is explicitly granted. So really be forthright about saying, I want you to do this, and in order to do it, you're going to need to do X. You're going to need, I understand, you're going to need to take a break. You're going to need to take the time to put the PPE on and take it off, you're going to, et cetera. So that's really an important communication. Solicit employee feedback and ideas. You're going to get a lot better buy-in that way. You're also going to know much more quickly what isn't working. If nobody's wearing the goggles because they're fogging up, you need to know that. And so then you can work on getting anti-fog, et cetera. So having that information will help you troubleshoot issues. Just quickly, let's talk a little bit about that sort of general information. What happens during a farm outbreak and how that relates to how you want to prepare your workers. So again, this is from that fact sheet. This is Wisconsin specific, so real high level. If there's an outbreak of avian flu among animals in the workplace, DATCAP will contact the health department. The health department contacts the employer to get the contact information for workers exposed to HPAI to begin self-monitoring or to set up employer-based reporting. So the health department is going to need to know, how many people do we think were exposed? Anybody showing symptoms today? No? Okay. Tomorrow there's going to be another check-in, et cetera. So there's going to be continual symptom monitoring, and we'll talk about that in a minute. That can be the health department directly talking to those individual workers, or it can be the employer gathering that information in an aggregate form and sending that back. And then DACAP will work as the lead agency to manage the infected animals and animal products. But if then a worker has symptoms, then that information needs to be reported to the health department as soon as possible so that any next steps can be taken at that point. So I want to address a concern that can come up in these situations. So if the health department is collecting information, what happens with that information? So the information that's collected is legally protected. It's considered protected health information. The health department is only allowed to share information as needed to prevent the spread of disease. So we might need to notify other close contacts of the potential exposure, people who were on the farm, people who, they are, by virtue of this investigation, they're on a need to know basis. That information is held very tightly. No information is collected at all on immigration status or other sensitive topics. It's really just information that is germane to the disease investigation. But if there are major concerns, again, there's that option for if the employer can just say, okay, I have 15 employees who we think are exposed, and then every day ask all 15 of them during that period, do you have any of these things? No. And if everybody is symptom-free, then the employer can just report back, none of the 15 had any symptoms. If one of without giving any identifying information. So at that point, you're not providing any names to the health department at all. If somebody does develop symptoms, at that point, the health department is going to need to know who that person is and start working directly with them. But this is a way to minimize the amount of information that you're sharing if your employees have real concerns about sharing their personal information beyond the workplace. What happens then if an employee gets sick during an outbreak? So if someone gets sick while the monitoring is happening, there are 15 employees and one of them does get sick. Again, the health department needs to know and set up testing to confirm whether this is actually HPAI. And ideally, this is when, when you're waiting to see if your test results, when people would be quarantined. So strongly encourage folks to stay away from work and avoid contact with others until the test results are back. We know that that's the ideal and that doesn't always happen. We know people might continue to work. If people continue to work during this time, please take steps to reduce the risks of spread. So have them wear a well-fitting respirator, and if you can, assign the tasks with minimal human and animal contact until the test results are back. It's really that balance of what people feel needs to happen to keep their jobs or keep the operations running, but also you really don't want that to be spread any farther than is necessary. And particularly if you already have an outbreak at this point, that's a pretty high risk situation. It's possible, this has not happened as far as I know, but it is possible that you could have a situation where we don't find out first that the animals are sick and we don't have an identified outbreak on a farm, but one or more people are sick and there are enough different hints where it seems like maybe this isn't just somebody with pink eye or flu or cold, but maybe this is a little more happening, either because there's HPAI in the vicinity or the animals are showing maybe some signs of sickness, or several people are all becoming sick at once for whatever reason. So if somebody gets sick, testing is needed to confirm HPAI, and there are some steps to get people tested. Not everybody can just be tested off the bat, but if you're talking about a dairy worker with reason to suspect that they have been infected, then that's not going to be a terribly hard situation to get them set up with testing. So the health department or medical providers can help make that determination. If you, the employer, are wondering about, you have this borderline situation with some employees and there's no indication of animal illness at this point, you can contact the health department and ask for advice, if it feels like this is a borderline situation. And folks can weigh in on that with you. Sometimes you might have an employee who isn't sharing anything about how they're doing. You don't necessarily know that they're sick, or they're sick, but you don't have any suspicions. But in that situation, it's nice for them to have this tool that I'll show on the next slide, which is a zoonotic disease diagnosis card that is just a little pocket card that they can take in if they're already going in because they're sick. So the reason for this is, like we said, the symptoms are very similar to a lot of different illnesses, a lot of different influenza-like illnesses. And so if you're a medical provider and you don't know this person works on a dairy farm or has interacted with dairy farm recently, your mind's not gonna go to HPAI. But you have a different set of potential illnesses that you would consider if you knew this person could have been occupationally exposed. And so this is on our website. It's just like a little booklet. It folds into a wallet pocket card, four-sided. I didn't show the side that has Spanish on it. But this is just something that folks can take into the doctor with them and show to help the healthcare provider with their differential diagnosis. And this is something that's been used in other contexts in disease response, zoonotic disease response. I'll say also that is something that we can print out on cardstock and send to farms that are interested. You can also print it yourself. So then there's just a few other things that I think are helpful to think about now in terms of things that you can do that are relatively simple to lay the groundwork for worker health protections in an outbreak. And keeping in mind, these are also community and farm health protections. So in an outbreak, you're going to need people, your employees, to work with you in a lot of different ways and to work with other people. So you'll need people to honestly share information about themselves and others. They're going to have to share that they're not feeling well or how they are feeling. They're going to have to share who they live with, potentially, that kind of information. They're going to need to follow health and medical advice. This could include getting tested, treatment, quarantine, or even isolation for folks who are sick. Not at present, but a possible thing in the future was if this really escalated as a threat, there could be human HPAI vaccines. And so having people who have some trust in vaccines and some experience with vaccination can be very helpful, as opposed to the opposite. You're going to need people to adjust their work practices. You're going to need them to do that enhanced biosecurity, enhanced PPE use, and change schedules, roles, coverage, et cetera, and really be ready and able to make those adjustments. So there are some things that you can help with those situations, but really what all of those things can bring up are a lot of questions. And so thinking about what are some of the concerns that will come up for workers, and working backwards from those are important. So people are going to wonder about their jobs, right? Will I get fired if they know I'm sick? Will we all get fired if the cows get sick? Luckily, in dairy, you don't have to depopulate like in poultry. Seems like there's some more job security in this situation than folks in poultry have. So there's some reassurances you can potentially give there. About accessing medical care. How do I get to the doctor? What will they ask me there? How much will it cost? These are very normal concerns. If people don't have information like that before there's an emergency, it's really important to get that information. Do people feel safe going into town? Do they have transportation? Do they know how to protect the people they live with and have the information about not bringing contaminated clothing home, for instance, and washing up? People might be concerned about what happens to the cows if several are sick at once. You as a producer might very well have that concern, something to plan for. People can be concerned about, will answering health questions put me or my family in danger? That's where talking about the data privacy protections and the ability to share very, very minimal personal information through employer-based symptom reporting is helpful. Making sure that there's enough trust with local public health is helpful. And the why of why would people put in time and effort for extra protective measures, and what if those measures slow me down? So again, reinforcing the permission structure to actually engage in these actions which you want done to protect your farm and your workforce. So the things that can get in the way are the lack of trust, the lack of valid, high quality information, the lack of a plan, the lack of practice or relevant experiences that produce confidence, and lack of communication. So, there are a lot of things you can do right now to strengthen those if you're not already doing them on your farm. One thing I will say is literally tell your employees that you value them and their health. We do hear people say, like, the cow's health, people care more about the cow's health than mine. That's not a good message to lead with, and hopefully that's not true on your farm, but it's important to say it. Contingency plan for employee absences, generally normalize and facilitate access to healthcare. If these are folks who aren't going in to get healthcare when they have a crushing injury, they're probably not going to go in when they have flu-like symptoms, but maybe they should. So creating that normalization of access and care and modeling it. Providing those pocket cards, build yours and your employees' trust in the people and tools you'll need, whether that's local healthcare providers, public health, trust in available medicines, vaccination, all of those things. Where you don't have trust and you don't have the information you need, get the answers to the questions you still have and get those conversations that you need to have more confidence. Strengthen your training, employee management, communications, practice the protocols now about PPE use, disinfection, all of those things. You can call up your local public health officials and have a meet and greet. They may or may not be available when you're available. I know time is a real issue for folks in ag as well, but it is something that you can feel free to do. Also, sometimes they have mobile services that they can bring directly to your farm. Go through those, what employers should know about HPAI, what workers need to know about HPAI as a guide, and then provide realistic assurances where you can. So, if people are concerned about their jobs, give them the realistic, relevant information you can about their jobs. If they're concerned about data privacy or, safety in leaving the farm, give them the realistic reassurances that you can, so that they have the information that they need. And then additional resources that are linked to our webpage, DACAP materials. There are many other resources. There are many worker training guides that have been vetted with dairy workers that are in multiple languages. Those are through the National Center for Farm Worker Health, which is linked on our page. Many different audio and video messages in multiple languages, including some indigenous Central American languages if you have folks from Guatemala, Nicaragua. Risk assessments to help you figure out PPE use under different scenarios. Health Navigator contact information if you don't know how how your folks might be able to access healthcare. We have people who can help with that. And if you don't see what you need, just ask. So that's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kate. All right, Keith, you have a couple of questions there that I shared with you. You said try to give them a stab. So if you wouldn't mind
Sure.
reading the questions and see if you
Sure.
can answer
So
those.
the first question is gain of function research still occurring at the University of Wisconsin, as in other research institutions, referencing a Kuoka biological lab accident a while ago. There's been a lot, a lot of um, press about this recently. And just like at many research institutions, gain of function means different things, and they're done with at different levels. So I think that's probably an entire new webinar. But gain of function is very tightly regulated with the biosafety committees and environmental health and safety, which all of us deal with. That's a big deal for us here at the diagnostic lab running a BSL-3 facility. And then the next question about talking about gain of function as a super spreader event, similar to the reports of COVID coming out of China. I think really maybe that again would be a completely another meeting. And I understand that there's people that feel very passionately about that. And I think I would maybe steer this back for what we're talking about now is really a virus that has global reach, and our reservoir for these highly pathogenic avian influenza strains are in a wildlife species, which they're really difficult to control. So when we think about the migratory flyways, which in the United States, we have the West Coast, Mississippi, East Coast, and then a couple of things in between. And then they mix down either on the South Pole or the North Pole with Alaska and Asia and Europe. And that's really where we're looking at, well, how do you manage or mitigate that risk? For the dairy cow event, really, dairy cow having flu spread is a U.S. and U.S. only problem, spread farm to farm throughout a country, because of how our industry is built to provide food for the country and the world. Now, we did see a recent report of an antibody positive, meaning a cow was exposed in the Netherlands. And we heard some veterinarians actually this morning about that. But it didn't really leave that farm because they don't move lactating cows off the farm. And there's a lot of questions there. And we assume that cows are exposed for migratory birds. We just see a very different and unique event with the B313 strain that really only spilt over once from the information that we have now, which is significant in the late part of 2023 to 2024. So there's a lot in there and great questions. And I think that could probably be a few different extension talks coming in the future. So thank you.
All right, we don't have any other questions from the group. I think we maybe just with one final question as we're wrapping up here. We're coming back into the migratory bird season. Birds are going to start moving again. You said you saw a robin yesterday. Lots of people are excited about seeing birds again, and we know that they'll be traveling. We know that this situation in Wisconsin was likely from a migratory bird. What now that we've made it through already 2 years of this without any issue in Wisconsin, and now we had a case that wasn't symptomatic, what what kind of issues or what kind of things should farmers be looking for if they're not necessarily looking for symptomatic issues in their herd? And how can they be prepared? What kind of things should they be ready for if something like this pops up in their herd? What are the big pieces that they should be ready for if something like this pops up, and how can they combat this quickly?
I can talk from the animal side then, Kate. Maybe you can talk on the human side. I think with migratory birds coming through, my bigger concern is actually domestic poultry and wildlife. So we had a red-tailed hawk and a goose, I think, in this past week. The red-tailed hawk was from Dane County, and the goose, I think, was Milwaukee County. And that's because the virus is in the environment. There's nothing we can do about that, but we can recognize what does that actually mean. If I had a cat that was indoor outdoor, I would try and keep that cat indoors because that's where we're seeing cats, foxes, and other scavengers like hawks. That's where they're getting infected is from scavenging dead bodies or even preying upon bird species. Now, I have an indoor cat, so I understand that having an indoor outdoor cat but not letting them go outdoors would be it's hard. Same thing if you have backyard chickens. Our neighbors have backyard chickens. Keep them confined and away from any type of migratory wildfowl. Like if you have standing water on your property, we don't want your domestic animals commingling with birds that are coming through. That's hard to do. For the dairy side, really, there are a lot of different programs out there, and the first one would be National Milk Testing Strategy. That is looking at making sure that we know if virus is coming through or what it looks like and how it's changing. And I think if you were to see a positive or a detection, you'd be hearing from our colleagues at the Department of Animal Health. And my first order of or my first part of advice would be make sure you're talking to your herd veterinarian and you're ready. You're talking about biosecurity or what would it look like or how could I manage if I had to change how animal movement was on the farm or it doesn't have to be just into flu. It could be salmonellosis or some of the other issues that we deal with normally working with food producing animals. If you're going to see cows like a D1.1, those cows weren't sick. It was really not something that came up, and neither were the people. But we were able to detect it in milk, and then we were able to understand more moving forward. But if there were a strain that did make cows sick, what we saw in our B as in boy strain were older cows. Usually they were second lactation or greater. They were either mid lactation or end lactation. They started with their rumination monitors dropped, their milk dropped. They also developed a high fever. And it was a pretty significant number, and the attack rate was really fast, meaning as one cow got sick, then they started to all get sick in what we would call a propagating epidemic. So when in doubt, anytime we see something abnormal, all of our dairy farmers are watching their cows very, very closely. When in doubt, or if Dairy Comp or any of your other monitoring software picks up something, say something, just like in our human side. Call your veterinarian, and if your veterinarian needs help, we can also contact Department of Animal Health, and we can all work through this together. I think your light turning off, Dr. McCoy, was my cue to pass it to you.
No, that's great. Yeah, I think the only other thing I would say is, for folks not to touch dead birds, other dead animals. We were talking about dairy specific, but if there are dead birds on the property and when the water that they're in, all of that stuff, explicitly emphasize that with workers as well, and just keep that situational awareness.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us today. For additional resources and information or unbiased university-based dairy resources, please visit Extension Dairy Program on the web at dairy.extension.wisc.edu or find us on Facebook at Extension Agriculture. Thank you and have a good afternoon.